But actually, the question I often ask ministries is, what would you do differently if you knew Jesus would come back in 100 years? What if we built courses that were fit for purpose for ministries across the world on each of these 9 dimensions, so that any ministry who was anywhere in the world could go through the 9D scan and at the same time have courses that would help them no matter what worldview they were in, no matter what culture they were in.
A very warm welcome to the Lausanne Movement podcast for those who have a passion to accelerate global mission together. I'm your host, Jason Watson, and today on the podcast, we have the opportunity to hear from one of my fellow South Africans, Neil Hart, who's the executive head of the Mergon Foundation. During our time together, Neil shares valuable insights into funding kingdom initiatives, into what it takes to build healthy organizations. And he shares a phenomenal resource that's available to you today for free called 54, which helps you cultivate healthy ministries and organizations. So, if you're interested in helping your organization or ministry take the steps it needs to take in order to become the most healthy version it can be, I want to encourage you to grab your headphones and let's dive into my interview with Neil Hart. Well, Neil, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here in the middle of all that's going on in Lausanne.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy time. We're recording this near the end of the gathering, and it's been lots of content, lots of people. And I just can't believe, you're a fellow South African. You're the second South African I've hosted on the podcast. But I actually can't believe it took this moment to bring us together. But I am grateful for your time. Neil, I always begin these podcasts by just hearing the story that is brought to the table. And so I'd love to would you kick us off by just sharing how you came to form a love for Jesus and how you formed a love for his kingdom?
Great. Well, I grew up on a farm, the son of 5 generations of farmers in the Eastern Cape, and went into business really early. I was the only person in my family actually that had ever gone into business, which is an unusual thing. And the Lord really got hold of me in that first sort of formative year. I grew up in a Christian household, but I was running in the opposite direction. And it was, one weekend going home to the farm for the weekend, and the Lord just really got hold of me and grabbed my heart, and immediately started to stir a love for the nations. And so I think right from when I was a young believer, and that was probably 30-something years ago, I've carried a love for the nations in my heart and tried to, think through. Often in church, we are focused so much on the gathering that happens on a Sunday. And when you think about the nations, sometimes the gathering that happens on the Sunday doesn't serve that sort of, I guess, more apostolic drive. And so that really moved us more and more into traveling to go and see what God was doing. And eventually, after 20 years in business, taking over a missions organization. So I took over the leading of All Nations from Floyd McClung in 2013 in Cape Town. And we planted churches mostly amongst unreached places in Africa, Middle East, a bit of India, Indonesia. And then in 2018, God really called me out of that in a way that was at first shocking to me, because I'd given up, my salary, I'd given up my life. We were living in Port Elizabeth, Gqeberha at that stage, and we'd moved to Cape Town, and I thought that was really going to be a forever season. And then God just really miraculously spoke to me and said, it's time to resign. And I was shocked at that. And so convinced of that, and through some prophetic words that really clearly lined up, I resigned from that with no idea what I was to do. And I'll make this short, but 7 days later, my wife had a dream. And in the dream, she woke me up and she said, somebody from Mergon phoned you in the dream and asked you if you'd come and lead the foundation. Now, Mergon, the foundation I work for now, was not well known to me, but I did know who they were, and I certainly didn't have a desire to go and work there. But it's incredible how God brings all things together in our lives. And 3 days later, somebody from Mergon phoned me and said, would you consider leading the foundation?
Wow.
And so I knew that God had really prepared me for this particular season that I'm in right now. And so 20 years in business, a number of years in missions, is perfect. Actually, who would have known to lead a foundation? Because you need to steward a lot of finances and you need to have an apostolic heart for the nations.
Wow, I'm literally getting chills as I'm hearing that story. You're right. I mean, it's amazing how God directs our paths. I mean, business and mission leads perfectly to what you're doing, like you're saying. And man, it's just, like I said, I'm getting chills. So could you just share a little bit about what Mergon does? Because I want to chat to you about nonprofits. I want to chat to you about organizational health. And so could you just share a little bit about that? And then I want to dive into that and talk about what a healthy nonprofit looks like.
Yeah, Mergon was founded about 45 years ago now by Francois Fanikak. He was our founder. He was a successful businessman, initially a failed businessman who he reached out to God and said, God, would you save my business? And through God really intervening in a most amazing way, he became then very, very successful and gave away every couple of years would move more shareholding out of his name and into the foundation's name. Until now, a year or so ago, 70% of all of the assets are owned by the foundation. And the only beneficiary of the foundation is the kingdom of God.
Wow.
So he wrote himself out of the foundation, out of those shares, and everybody else, in order for whichever generation is stewarding Mergon's assets to be able to do that with a real open hand, clear mandate from him, which is to build a kingdom, to be catalyst for kingdom impact. And in 2008, he handed over to our group CEO, and I joined in 2018 to lead the foundation. And so we really just focus on resourcing ministries, primarily across Africa and Middle East, but our heart's desire is to see Africa take its rightful place in the world stage over these next number of years, which I believe it will do. And for that, we work with about 150 different ministries across that region. And we resource them, and we're really interested in helping them to be strong, sustainable, and have impact.
Wow. I want to take a moment just to pause there and just to recognize that a businessman has continued to make an impact on God's kingdom, and by setting aside all those assets. And perhaps that, I can imagine someone listening in on this conversation who is a businessman.
Yeah.
And maybe that inspires them towards the same kind of reaction. And I've heard of different organizations as well being funded through something very similar. And it makes so much sense. If God has given you so much, to give it back to his kingdom.
Yeah.
As a businessman, do you have anything to say to fellow businessmen before we dive into nonprofits?
Yeah, I think business is just such an incredible platform. Not only, I think we limit the business frame and thinking, obviously, towards funding. And I think it's a tragedy, although funding is really important. But the skills that business people have often are able to solve problems that profits don't know how to solve. And so that's really something that I would encourage business people to do, not only to be a generous steward of what God has entrusted into their hands, because stewardship, I love leadership, but actually, I never loved management. Management, I always felt like I was doing something on behalf of somebody else. Leadership, you have an ability to be the final decision maker. And really, that's just ego. But stewards, and we're all called to be stewards, we don't own anything. We manage it on behalf of somebody else, and that is God. And I think that's the paradigm shift, that when we grab hold of that as business people, we can really impact the world in a powerful way.
Yeah. Great. So my first question is, you deal with hundreds of nonprofits. In your mind, as you're interacting, what separates a healthy nonprofit from an unhealthy one, a great nonprofit from an average one? Are there any indicators for you as you enter and interact with some of these nonprofit leaders, as you engage with what the nonprofits are doing? What stands out to you that you almost say, I can see almost instantly who I'm dealing with? Yeah. What are those things?
I think the first things would be the fairly obvious things, which is a great leadership and a great leadership team, people who have vision and who have character. Often when we're working with ministries or getting introduced to ministries, it's the first thing you can see. You can see this appears to be someone who I can trust, who's been tested in those schools of life and has come through with good character and good vision and is a good leader. And I think that's really something that trumps most of the other things that I'll speak about. So, you can have the healthiest organization with a less than average leader, and you've still got a problem. So leadership is a very, very big thing. But there's a lot else that makes up what a good nonprofit should be. So, I think about a healthy culture, because a leader that's filled with vision must be able to draw people to that mission and that vision. And those people should be able to gather together and run hard after the vision that God's called them to. And if they do that well and they're led well, the culture will be really excellent. Very often we do find nonprofits where the culture is toxic, and it's because they're overworked or underpaid or not appreciated. Volunteers run on encouragement. They often don't run on money.
Sure.
They run on encouragement, and I think many leaders don't understand that. So, I think about leadership, I think about the culture, I think about strategy. Many ministries, they have a hunch that God wants them to do something, but they don't pay a lot of attention to developing good strategy to do that. And if they do, sometimes they don't take enough time to measure whether their strategy is working.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we walk a journey with ministries, we encourage them to think about impact measurement. And when they start to measure impact, they realize that their strategy wasn't so good in the first place, and they have to change everything. So there are a number of different factors. We typically look across 9 different dimensions of organizational health, and that really helps us and the ministry to get a better sense of the organization.
I would like to dive a little bit into this idea of kingdom impact as an indicator, right? So in the Lausanne movement, one of our fourfold vision statements is kingdom impact in every sphere of society. Now, how do you go about identifying whether an organization is truly having impact? Because sometimes what we measure are things that maybe we shouldn't be measuring. And so it'd be interesting to hear from you how you determine whether an organization is truly having kingdom impact or not.
I think about it in terms of the 3 pieces of effort: input, output, and outcomes. And those 3 are very distinctly different. A lot of people put attention on input. We're working really hard to do the following thing: writing training materials, whatever it would be. They're putting a lot of effort into what they're doing. That's great, it's commendable. Output is, what we're seeing happening as a result of the ministry. But outcomes is a slightly longer term view, is what happened after you did what you did. What were the results? In other words, if you want to see a community transformed, and your strategy is to develop Christ-centered leaders, you can measure as an outcome that we've trained 100 leaders. But the outcome at the end of the day has got to be that community was transformed through the leadership. And so, as an example, you can measure input, you can measure output, but you ultimately got to measure outcomes. And that takes a slightly longer term view, which a lot of people want to solve problems in a year or 2. Typically problems only get solved in a generation or 2. And so we do encourage leaders to be generational thinkers. Raising leaders is really important for us. It shows how healthy a leader is, if they're raising leaders around them, and if they're thinking generationally, and they're thinking about long-term outcomes.
Okay, so let's zoom in on the Lausanne movement for just a moment. I realize that the Lausanne is maybe a new framing for you. You don't work within the space. You're not a catalyst. You're not a part of any of those networks. So let's talk about this gathering, because this is something you have context for. We are bringing thousands of leaders together. There was a lot of input. Someone stopped me in the corridor before this conversation, and they said, "Wow, this is an excellent gathering." And I was like, "Well,
you've worked really hard to make that happen."
It's been a lot of years for a lot of people. So I hope it is, thank you. So there's been a lot of input. The output is obviously like we all together, right? But what would be, like, if you could suggest some outcomes, like how could we measure the outcomes of this, whether it truly will have impact? I realize I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would be the suggestions that you would have for us as we reflect as a movement and say, okay, what outcomes should we actually have?
So let's talk about output first. So output could be, 100 collaborative ideas that came out of this. Outcomes would be that those yielded results in their particular area. So if I think about Lausanne, and we think about the city movements, the collaborations, can we now go back and measure those cities and say, yes, there was transformation? And I think, there have been some great stories about that. So this is input, right?
Yeah.
And this is energy, and you guys have worked exceptionally hard. But actually the real hard work begins now to ensure that all this effort that you guys have put in actually results in transformation in environments that it's meant to be.
Okay, so talk to me now. I'm a Lausanne staff person. Coach me. How can I what steps would you put in place if you were sitting in my seat? Say you put in a lot of effort, steward this moment well. Does anything come to mind?
One or two things. I think the first thing is allow people to be creative around ideas. Some of the best leaders that I've worked with in ministries encourage their teams to be creative. So it may feel like people are in a cattle race where you're kind of just putting everybody into these tight runs, and they think they know what they're coming out with from now. But I think a big part of this now is actually go and experiment. If I was convening some of these collaborative teams, I'd say go and try 5 things for 3 years, and then come back and tell us what is working out of those 5 things, and then go and do that thing. Because often we get into our solution mode too early on.
Wow. Yeah.
And so we haven't actually been creative. We haven't experimented. We haven't asked the Lord to show us new solutions that we haven't thought of. There's a lot of talk in the last couple of days about new wine. Well, we're not going to come out of here just with a new wine straight away. We actually need to go out there, try different things, and allow the Lord to reveal to us what it looks like. And then we run after that. And it's typically because of short-term thinking. I think that's one of the church suffers from short-term thinking. Somehow every generation thinks that, what is the thing we say mostly to new believers? If Jesus comes back tomorrow, how are you going to live if you know Jesus coming back tomorrow? But actually, the question I often ask ministries is, what would you do differently if you knew Jesus would come back in 100 years? And if you knew you had 100 years or you had 25 years, how would you build differently? How would you think about your solutions differently? How would you take time to make sure that you were putting a lot of effort into the perfect solution, not just a good solution? So that would be probably what would come to mind.
That's worth this podcast interview, I think. And I was just reflecting as you were talking. I interviewed one of our previous CEOs. His name is Dr. Leighton Ford. And he encouraged us to become and go back to prayer as a foundation. And I think, maybe I can speak for myself as a minister. You're so busy doing ministry that you sometimes stop and you realize you haven't actually even encountered the presence of God that day.
Yeah.
And as we head out of here, there's this invite to collaborative action teams doing ministry, and of course we have to. And that's part of our conversation is how do we do ministry in a healthy way. But as you mentioned, thinking more of a long term, taking the time, take 3 years, which sounds like a lot of time, to just experiment, to pray, to seek the Lord. It feels like that is such a healthy challenge. At least I'm taking that away. So before we move on to healthy organizational leadership, you're encountering organizations that are coming to you for funding, and they're saying, hey, can you help? Can we partner together? Could you maybe mention a few of the things that you look for, and maybe it'll come out in our conversation about health, that you're saying, yes, I will fund, I'll partner with you in this, but I'm not going to partner with these people. What is?
Yeah. So we partner in one of 2 primary ways. We partner with undesignated 3-year funding, and we partner on specific projects. Projects are fairly easy. Somebody comes to you and says, I'm working in Sudan and we're going to do the following things. It's going to cost X and we believe Y is going to happen. And it's normally a 3 month, 6 months, 12 month kind of a thing. And that's normally really easy, and you can measure at the end of the day where the outcomes, does it look like we're moving in the right direction. And based on that, you can decide, do we want to keep going? It's a little harder when we're looking at undesignated partnership funding over 3 years, and often that moves to 6 years. And so they're really thinking carefully about the leadership team, really thinking carefully about, is this organization robust? Very often ministries come and they want to scale. They say, we're in 3 countries, we want to go to 10. But when we look at organizational health, and I think that's the gift of us bringing that perspective, there's some things that we can often see that would say to us, please don't scale now. So as an example, we're working with a ministry that felt like they were really ready to go into another 10 nations. And when we worked with them on their organizational health, we realized that their systems were going to break if they did that. And so we said, please don't do anything expansive. Let's rather take a year and let's work on building robust systems into your ministry. And then after that, let's decide, together, should we be scaling? And they did that, and they're really, really fruitful at the moment because they took time to build into the organizational health. So we are not in love with organizational health at all. Our focus is kingdom impact. But healthy leaders leading healthy organizations will have the most sustainable, effective kingdom impact over time.
So let's dive into organizational health.
Yeah.
As you look at an organization, how can you tell the difference between a healthy organization from an unhealthy one?
So we developed an assessment, a scan to do that, because we found that we were asking a lot of different questions in a lot of different circumstances. And it just made a lot more sense for us to actually try and create a framework around that. So initially we were actually creating this for our own sake as a due diligence, but we realized as we were developing it that ministries gained tremendous insight out of their own ministry organizational pieces that they hadn't seen before. And so we've developed an assessment called the 9D assessment, which is 9 dimensions of organizational health. It takes 25 minutes to fill it in. We don't want one leader, we want 5 or 6 leaders to fill it in one organization so we can get a broad view of the organization. And very often we find that a ministry leadership team was only really aware of 3 or 4, 5 dimensions. And suddenly they see these others and they realize, okay, if we paid a bit more attention to that, or actually we're doing this really, really well, we didn't even know it had impact on the other aspects. Then they start to see themselves differently. And that helps us because we don't use that to say, you're a bad organization, we're not going to fund you.
Yeah.
We use that to say, we want to fund you, we love you guys, we love what you're doing, but this helps us to know how to partner with you better.
Okay.
So we know you want to train and plant churches and whatever it would be, but why don't we also fix up your IT system? Or why don't we also help you with your board and governance in order to strengthen that at the same time?
So I'm going to include that into the show notes, the 9D assessment.
Great.
But could you just go through some of those key elements? Because it's a circle.
Yes.
Right? Okay, I remember seeing it.
Yeah,
So it all seems like they connect with each other,
they do.
and they're all it's like a knock-on effect if you do the one.
It mostly does. So, we were thinking through organizations from the lens of how does an organization begin, how does it evolve, and where should it be moving towards? And so
Cool.
That's why there is a little bit of a chronological order, but that's not entirely true. Leadership is the first one because no organization exists without God giving a leader a vision, right? Everything starts like that. You look at scripture, that's how any move of God begins. Leadership, then a leader's got to be able to call people to the mission. So culture, teams, values is the second piece. From there, organizations generally need to be able to communicate what they're doing. And so what we're doing right here is communications, brand, storytelling, that side of things. And if you're successful at that, you'll probably be able to raise funds. And so, fundraising would be another dimension. We've often found that there's a direct correlation between ability to tell a good story and ability to raise funds. And so the biggest perceived need across these 9 dimensions, as we've done this with hundreds of ministries, is fundraising. The biggest challenge is storytelling.
Sure.
And so when we teach people how to tell their story, their fundraising normally changes as a result of it. And so from fundraising, go to strategy, from strategy, eventually go to your financial management operations side, and then through towards governance and board. Often there's a real disconnect or breakdown with accountability structures and things. And then the last one is impact measurement. And so that really, then the leadership should be understanding the impact measurement, bringing the culture, the team back into understanding that, redeveloping strategy, and moving around that circle again.
So before we move on too fast, as you were mentioning, one of the key things that every organization wants, especially nonprofits, is funding.
Yeah.
So what do you teach? Like, say you meet an organization and they've got a good story to tell, which even as I've engaged with people all around this convencia, amazing stories to tell. How do you help these nonprofits tell their story in a way that really enables them to receive the kind of funding and support that they need?
So let me make a distinction before I answer your question. So Mergon, we developed the 9 dimensions, and we began working on it, and eventually we put that into its own entity. So it's actually its own nonprofit, and it's outside of Mergon now, and that's called 54 Collective. I'll tell you a story hopefully later on. But we as Mergon don't take time to teach people how to tell their stories, but 54 has developed courses around that. And so we've found some of the best people in the world, the best storytellers in the world, and we've asked them to codify that or create courses around how to tell stories. And that's all accessible. So Mergon is not the hero in the story. 54 is doing a lot of that work, and that's an amazing collaboration.
Yeah, and that's ultimately where we want to land this, because I've taken a look at 54 sites, the kind of content that you're making available, and I know that you're going to continue to scale what's there. So let's talk about 54, because I feel like the key takeaway for anyone in this conversation is you got to go and take a look at this. It's a great resource for those who are wanting to scale, for those who are wanting to bring health into their organizations. So can you tell us the backstory to it? How did it develop?
So after we did these 9 dimensions, we were having to plug holes with money. So in other words, a ministry went through the 9D assessment, found out, let's say they were bad at their financial systems. We'd have to plug that hole, because they'd come back to us and say, well, what do you want to do about it? And then we'd hire an accountant, fly them into the ministry for 10 days, help them solve their problem, fly them out. And I was just thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this, less costly and a more scalable way to do this. And so we began asking questions. What if we built courses that were fit for purpose for ministries across the world on each of these 9 dimensions, so that any ministry who was anywhere in the world could go through the 9D scan and at the same time have courses that would help them, no matter what worldview they were in, no matter what culture they were in. And that felt like a big idea. And so typically with Mergon, before we build any big idea, we went and looked, has anybody else done this? We don't want to do things that anybody else has done. And we just found that there was nothing else like this. And so in order to make it truly culturally agile, which was a big, big dream for us with 54, no one culture can truly make anything multicultural or culturally agile. So I wanted to partner with different foundations in order to help us with blind spots that we didn't know we had. And so I'd been chatting with David Denmark from the McLaren Foundation around organizational health prior to this. And I said to him, hey, why don't we do this together? And David loves collaborating. And so that kind of happened. And then we said, well, who else can we find? So we set out to try and find a foundation in the East and a foundation in the North. And our partner in the North is 3W Foundation. They're a foundation in the Czech Republic, and they bring a lot of that Baltic, Eastern European, even some of the sort of Scandinavian thinking into our thinking that we would be lost without. We've struggled to find a partner in the East, but we've built a cultural agility panel with people who can give us insights from the East. And so we've got the honor shame worldview represented, we've got power fear worldview represented, we've got guilt innocence baked in. And every course that we've built, we've tried to make sure that we're not leaning too hard into a guilt innocence or power fear or honor shame worldview. As an example, if you ask leadership questions in America, and you try and take those leadership questions and ask ministries in China, they won't understand the questions you're asking. As an example, when we said to people who were taking the scan or the assessment, we said, just answer it as honestly as possible. We realized that honesty is subject to a value that's higher than it. And so, many in the West would think, well, what does that even mean? Like, what's higher than honesty? Well, in the East, honor is higher than honesty. And so honor is a very, very high value. And so all of our values are subject to values that are higher than it. And so when you say, would you just be honest about your leader, but you're in an honor shame culture, you can't be honest about your leader. You've got to be honoring about your leader. It's a much higher value. And so we've really had to think through and wrestle through those 9 dimensions through the lens of cultural agility. And so it's been a great collaborative story. We've built it together. We took longer to build it because we wanted to build it really thoroughly. If Mergon had just tackled it, we could have built it quicker. But it would, we would have had to have spent all the money, and we would have missed a whole bunch of things that our partners now are also collaborating with us financially. They're collaborating us with cultural worldview. They're helping. So we're all doing this together. We get together once a year and we just say where we're going to go from now on. So it's been a great collaboration.
Yeah. And what I appreciate about this, just from a Lausanne perspective, and this isn't a Lausanne initiative at all, but we've been speaking so much about collaborative action, collaborating with each other towards God's global mission. And this is a great example of a globally diverse collaboration.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to hear from you just before we move on and speak more deeply about this. How has that process been? Because we speak about collaboration as, oh, let's just go do it. But actually collaboration at the end of the day is more difficult. Just like you said, you could have done it in a year, but it's taken longer. What are some lessons you've learned that could be applicable to those who are listening?
So blind spots, I think, is a very big one to consider. So we have blind spots that collaborative efforts help us in. And so, they're just mistakes I would have made. Our team would have made these mistakes if we didn't have collaborative partnerships. But then, of course, as you're trying to work out when someone else is making you go slower because they see a blind spot and you can't see it, it feels frustrating. And so, the advantage is getting rid of blind spots. The disadvantage, it takes time to do that. And so working together is a sacrifice. It really is. And we could be more efficient. The big thing is the longevity of what we're building. We know it's going to go further, longer, because it's built really, really well. And so I think, there's some of those things. Then there's also just intellect. Somebody's studied something or has knowledge on a subject that we didn't have, or vice versa. And so you've got people sitting around the table who just have a diverse skill set, and that enhances the whole team. So we've become better as a result of it. We've had to go slower, but it's cost us less and it's been more of a joy. So there's a lot of joy in the relationships. We really enjoy working together on this.
So you told us how 54 has come about. Tell us what it is. Tell us how people can engage with 54.
Yeah. So the URL that we've built, the platform, is 54, the letters, not the numerals. I'll tell you why. Collective.com. It's 54collective.com. It comes out of Isaiah 54, verse 2 and 3. When we were praying about a name, God gave us a capacity building scripture. I had never thought there was a capacity building verse in scripture. Stretch out your curtains, lengthen your cords, drive your stakes in deep, because you're going to expand to the left and to the right.
Yeah.
God is speaking to the Israelites and he's saying to them, if you don't strengthen your household, you're not going to be able to expand to the left and right, but do it because you are.
Wow.
And so there was a real encouragement for us that God spoke to us in the moment of forming 54. And so we named it 54 from Isaiah 54. The platform you can access, you'll be able to do the 9D assessment. So the 9D assessment is on the platform. And once you've done it, it'll give you a visual of your organization. So you get now to understand your organization through the lens of those 9 dimensions, which is very helpful. And you can then also go and access over 90 courses that we've built across those 9 dimensions. Some have 5 or 6 different courses, some have 10, 15 different courses. And each of those courses were built through using a world-class specialist. So we said, who's the very best person that can speak on the subject? And then we went to go knock on their door and said, will you help us to build that dimension? So Peter Greer, he wrote the book Mission Drift. It's a brilliant book. It's helped so many ministries. Peter has helped us to build all the mission and vision components. Malcolm Weber, who leads LeaderSource, has helped us to build a lot of the leadership stuff, and so on and so forth. So we've gone out to find the very best people, and they've built it together with us. We will now continue to grow those resources around those 9 dimensions, and we will also translate that into more and more languages.
Wonderful. So how can people get involved? How can they sign up? You mentioned where they go. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But are there any next steps?
There's no sign up. There's nothing that they need to do. They could just jump in and get going. We are relaunching the platform in January on a better technology platform, and that's really going to help us. And we're building an intelligence engine into that. What that means is once you've done the assessment, the site will automatically choose the very best content for your ministry.
Very nice. Yeah.
It takes data from your life stage, your leadership stage, and from the data from the 9D assessment, and it then recommends that you do the following courses. Our desire is not to get anyone to do 90 courses.
That's a lot.
It's not an MBA in how to run a ministry. we're very practical. So we're saying just do these courses in the next 3 months and it'll help you. And we want to identify what that is. A year later, you can come back, do it again, learn some more things. We want to do right learning at the right time to help ministries have kingdom impact.
Wonderful. So I'm just reflecting on my own context. You know, the church that I'm in, we have a church, we have a school, we have a missions nonprofit. Say I've got those 3 leaders. Is it, do each of those 3 leaders then do the assessment and they share those assessments with their staff? Or is it a personal thing? So is it a healthy leader makes a healthy organization? Or is it something that I then take to my organization and I share it with everyone?
It's the latter. So, you know, if a couple of the leadership management team do the 9D, then you share it with the organization. We'll even do 54. The team will actually do a workshop with you if you would be interested and take you through a sort of a 2 or 3 hour reflective exercise where we ask you questions about what are you seeing in each of those areas. And that really enhances the learning. So that's just a nice value add. We can't do it for everybody, but we are happy to do that for different ministries. And then you share it with the organization and you say, hey, why don't we become a learning organization? That's our joy for ministries is, you know, Mergon, we're a learning organization. We always want to be, and it's the essence of discipleship, isn't it? A disciple is a learner. We never want to be experts. We always want to be learners. And often we do find ministries, they kind of think they've know it all sometimes. If you're a ministry that does X, you can become a little bit of an expert at that. And so part of this is a humility journey, is to say, why don't we change our philosophy internally to become a learning organization? Let's go on this consistent learning journey to make the organization more and more resilient. What we found is if the organization is unhealthy in some way, and generally all organizations are unhealthy in some way, the energy of the people, the 50, 100 people that are working in that organization gets sucked back into the organization, into stopping gaps, you know, filling holes, rather than being projected outwards towards the impact side of things. And so that's why I said we're not in love with organizational health. We want the energy of the organization to be pointed towards the goal of achieving the mission of Jesus.
Wonderful. Neil, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I've learned a lot. As you can tell, I threw my own questions in there for my own personal growth, but I'm really trusting that those who have listened in have learned with me. I'm going to make sure that I put 54's link into the show notes for those who are listening. Do you have any last thoughts as we reflect on our whole conversation that you would like to share with those who are part of our movement, who have nonprofits, who have churches? Is there anything you'd like to share with them?
I would probably go back and just double down a little bit on that whole thing of thinking long term. It feels to me like something that's so important for us in this day and age. The world seems to be moving faster, wanting quicker solutions, and the church is adopting often the culture of the world. If we take a long-term view, and I encourage everybody, if you're in any ministry, take at least a 25-year view of what you're doing. You're probably not going to solve the problem you're working on right now in less than 25 years. That means that you as the leader are not going to be leading the organization if you're coming close to solving that problem. It'll be the person who's taken over from you. So build resilient organizations, build resilient leadership teams, raise up young leaders, and go for it. You know, God's waiting for us. But there've been 52 generations, if my calculations are correct, since Jesus was on earth. Every generation thought they were going to see Jesus in that generation. Most likely, there's still going to be a few more generations until he comes back. And so let's build strong, resilient organizations to see his kingdom come.
Wonderful. Neil, thank you so much for those final words. We'll close the podcast. It's been a blessing. Thanks for joining us.
Anyway.